Oh, well, everybody's heard about the bird. Bird, bird, bird. The bird's a word. Oh, well, a bird, bird, bird. Bird is a word. Oh, well, a bird, bird, bird. Well, a bird is a word. Oh, well, a bird, bird, bird. The bird's a word. Oh, well, a bird, bird, bird. Well, a bird is a word. Oh, well, a bird, bird. The bird's a word. Oh, well, a bird, bird, bird. The bird's a word. Oh, well, a bird, bird, bird. Well, a bird is a word. Oh, well, a bird, bird. The bird's a word. Oh, well, don't you know about the bird? Well, everybody knows that the bird is a word. Oh, well, a bird. Everybody's heard about the bird. Bird, bird, bird. The bird's a winner when a bird, bird, bird. The bird's a winner when a bird, bird, bird. The bird's a winner when a bird, bird. The bird's a winner when a bird, bird, bird. The bird's a winner when a bird, bird, bird. The bird's a winner when a bird, bird, bird. The bird's a winner when a bird, bird, bird. The bird's a winner when a don't you know about the bird? Well, everybody's talking about the bird.
Hi everybody, welcome to a special episode of The Word. We're joined by our panel today.
Megan.
Adam.
Mike.
Jason.
And today we're not going to be actually drawing from Rando Hat because there is an upcoming pressing issue which we need to discuss, which is Bill 156. So who would like to get started on this? Any takers? Okay. Well, I'm going to start by opening this up. Yeah, there we go. Oh, look, Lincoln. Look.
Clean break.
Clean break, again, for like the 50th time. Imagine that. Yeah, so Bill 156, the Ontario AG GAG Bill. A lot of people lately have been fighting against this. And at least I feel myself that fighting against this, you're kind of just giving the farmers what they're looking for, honestly, because the whole intent behind this bill is to get activists butthurt, to show the farmers that the Conservatives are taking their concerns seriously and they're enacting laws which are going to make activists butthurt. So by actively being butthurt about this, by being upset about this bill, you're actually feeding directly into what they want to achieve with it.
Well done. Job accomplished for the Conservative government.
Right, because now these farmers are going to be sure to vote Conservative again.
Of course. Yeah. They got what they wanted. And the longer the activists continue to make waves about it, the Conservatives just keep getting more and more bonus from this because the farmers want to see activists upset about it. But in the end, is 156 really a big deal? Is it something that's going to prevent us from being active for non-human people? I don't think so. I think it's a straw man. 156 is just a straw man for the Conservative government to just make sure that their rural votes stay in place, right?
Yeah.
That's all it is. Ultimately, disrupting traffic has always been illegal, right? Trespassing, always been illegal. All that they've really done is, for trespass, they've made it more, they've raised the top end of the fine for trespassing at certain facilities, right? But the law works on precedence, and the precedence is activists going on farms not intending to do any harm, not intending to break anything, steal anything, just to do a demonstration. Typically those get dismissed because they say it's not in the interest of society to pursue these, right? Now, just because they've raised the bar on how high they can go with these fines doesn't mean that judges are going to automatically start charging people more money. It just means that that's available to them. But because of precedence, we're probably not going to see fines go up anymore. If you want to keep doing that, keep doing it. Judges have the power to charge you more, to fine you more, but ultimately it doesn't mean that because of precedence that they can actually do that. They're just going to continue doing what they've always done.
Right.
So it's a straw man. You know, the Conservatives got what they wanted. They got activists butthurt, and they got, they're showing their rural vote that they're doing something about it. But ultimately, have they actually done anything that's actually going to mean anything different? Not really.
Yeah, I think it's just, I mean, really, it's opposing it is kind of defending more welfareism anyway, because I mean, the only thing that Bill 156 would aim to stop is exposing the conditions. So,
Right.
I mean, it's nothing against the actual ownership of another being, or, you know, it doesn't address speciesism in any way, really.
No, that's a very good observation.
Yeah. It's, yeah, I don't see Bill 156 stopping an anti-speciesist campaign, because I mean we're not gonna help. I mean the only thing that we could do by trespassing and going against what Bill 156 is trying to stop is exposing conditions and treatment of animals. You know, it's not addressing the root cause of the atrocity and, you know, the actual issue, the core issue of owning another living being.
Right. I mean, we could just drive up to the public space outside of a barn, take a picture and go, oh look, an animal barn. That's wrong. That shouldn't exist.
Right.
We don't need to go in there because the animal's interest is not to be used at all.
Yeah.
So really, if we just evolve our campaigning and evolve our messaging to an anti-speciesist platform, then we don't need to go into the barns, because ultimately when we go into the barns and we film what's going on in there and we say, look at how horrible this is, what we are really saying by doing that is that they're not doing it the right way. That's what speciesist society hears. It's like, these people are not doing it the right way. I got to find another source for this that's doing it the right way. Where the message should be, this shouldn't be done at all.
Right.
So you're actually feeding into and enabling and upholding the humane myth, right? Which is what you're doing when you stand up for welfarist activism.
Exactly.
And that's a problem for non-human interests.
Yeah. And that should be the focus of everything we're doing, should it not be? Is what's not necessarily, you know, comfortable for us or what we want to be doing. It should be strictly about what serves their interests in the most effective manner. Like our most effective use of time to serve their interests. And I'm sure their main interest is not about how brutally they're exploited, but like Mike said, it's the fact that they're exploited at all.
Right.
Right? Because I mean, it could be sunshine and rainbows, but at the end of the day, if you're a fucking slave, you're still a fucking slave. It doesn't matter if it's, you know, happy barn or like sad cage, happy cage. It's still a fucking cage.
Exactly.
Right. Megan?
What do you got to say about this?
Yeah. We want to hear your opinion.
I don't know. I'm not very heavily into politics at all. I didn't really know about Bill 156 until like a week or two ago. But yeah, I agree that making laws surrounding animal agriculture just more heavily displays that there's eventually going to be a right way to do something wrong. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of pointless to oppose laws being put in place that it's like, oh, like, we're going to make it harder for you to expose these things when it's still just doing the wrong thing.
Right.
I think, like, I don't know, I'm not sure the non-human animals will have their liberation within this system. I think a reformist approach won't work. I think we need to tear this system down and build a new one. So, I mean, opposing Bill 156 is a complete waste of time in that regard.
Yeah, so like there are some things in that bill which will not stand a charter challenge, right?
Right. Like
Such as you want to talk about that, Adam?
like the under false pretenses part, which would target like whistleblowers and journalists and stuff. And I mean, that is a violation of people's constitutional rights and your ability to obtain employment for whatever reason you see fit, because it's not the government's job to regulate who is allowed to get employment in a certain field and for what reason. Like that's very overbearing and pretty illegal.
I think it also, what it's doing also is it's infringing on your right to freedom of thought.
Right.
It's saying if you think a certain way, you cannot. It would be a crime for you to apply for this job.
Right. And that's
wrong.
And that's a big problem. But I mean, even when you go into, like, even if you were to gain access to employment there and you were to, document whatever these conditions are, I mean, is that something that's actually serving benefit? Because, as Mike said again, focusing strictly on the conditions, because you got to remember that the people who are seeing a lot of this stuff, they're not like us, right? Like when we see the conditions, we know it's not about the conditions because we're beyond that. But when you look at regular speciesist society, and anytime there's a good action, right? And then all of a sudden somebody says conditions. Headline, activists protest conditions. And that just goes out into the media as, another welfarist thing. And that's what speciesists see, is that welfarist message. And the only way we're ever going to get rid of that is to just stop talking about that shit, because that's all that people see, right? Because you need to always remember you might see it one way, but you need to be thinking about how your target audience is going to see it, which is the general public, right? And that's why you got to keep your messaging crystal clear about it being about their legal status as property and the fact that they exist as objects, right? You got to make it really clear. And I think that going into these places and showing conditions and complaining about conditions is actually counterintuitive to promoting the message that we need to see to actually move the movement forward.
Like the action itself is a symbolic gesture. It can be a very powerful. For instance, that group that occupied that slaughterhouse in was it France?
No, that was in England.
In England, just a few weeks ago.
Smash speciesism.
Smash speciesism. Yeah,
that was excellent.
Excellent, because their messaging, they occupied the place, and they shut down the business
for the whole day.
And the messaging was 100% anti-speciesist, right? It was about the non-human interest not to be exploited and used. I mean, these occupations of farms and of slaughterhouses, they can be very powerful and impactful, but it's the messaging that needs to be tweaked. We need to come up with a cohesive one message that talks about the interests of non-humans not to be used as property and not to be slaves to humans, and demand that we should be demanding only one thing: that non-human people be recognized for their personhood. That's it. One clear message, and we don't go in there, we don't talk about how the conditions are, because that's not relevant to their interests.
Right.
Largely because of what you were saying, is because the problem with that is we end up reinforcing the ideas of a species of society that the only thing that animals have an interest in is not suffering.
Right.
Right? So you as long as you're doing it, and you got to remember, speciesists don't think the same way we do. They don't talk the same way we do. It's very different. So you've got to make sure your messaging is on point with exactly what you need them to hear for the benefit of non-human people. Other than that, if you're talking welfarism, you're just feeding into that speciesist idea that they only have an interest in not being harmed, and that's not right.
No.
They have much more needs than that. So what I think should have happened is activists should have went, fine, you want to bring in 156, that's fine, do it. do it. Fuck y'all. We're just going to evolve the movement to an anti-speciesist movement, and we're just going to plug away, because really, welfarism, it's a moot point. It's not necessary for us to talk about the conditions. In fact, it's contradictory to their interests. And just shift. Every time that the government or the farmers get what they want, shift, evolve, change. Just keep one step ahead of them. Don't demonstrate that you're all butthurt because you're not going to be able to do vigils anymore. Vigils is useless. It's really not helpful.
Well,
not helpful at all.
I don't know if it's totally useless. Like I think they just need to be retooled. Or, I mean, they should have been before they've now been outlawed. Eventually will be outlawed. But I mean, it's a good tool for new people. When new people come into the movement, for them to, witness what happens if they maybe have never seen it for the first time. But I mean, a lot of people treat it like that's the end of the road.
Right.
Like that's all that we can do, right? And I mean, it's great for your introduction to the situation. But I mean, once you've been introduced to the reality of the situation, I mean, I used to organize a save group. Like that's how we started. I mean, and we no longer organize a save group because I mean, it felt to us like, there was more that we could be doing. There was more effective use of our time, right? Because it's very traumatizing to people to continually put yourself in that situation where you're consistently witnessing that level of trauma. And that's why we have a lot of activist burnout, is because people are just continually submitting themselves to this trauma in this helpless situation where there's really no chance of ending what's happening at that spot by what you're doing. So I mean, it weighs on you more heavily and heavily as time goes on. And I think it's a good tool. Like vigils could have been a good tool for introducing people, like a stepping stone, right? Like you come in, some people, you want to try doing activism? Here, come with me. We're going to show you the reality of the situation, right? You bring them, you traumatize the shit out of them, and you take them back after and you go, okay, you want to do something about it? Now we'll do something about it, right? And that's when you move on to other stuff like these occupations and these other types of more radical type actions, right? Which are very valuable. But as Jason had said, the messaging needs to really be worked on because, I mean, so many great actions have been absolutely obliterated in the media by this ineffective messaging. And that's why when we do stuff, like, our messaging is paramount to everything we do because 90%, 99% of everyone that's ever going to hear about anything you're doing is only going to hear what's in the media. They're not going to see what you're putting out. They're not going to hear what your video, they're not going to see any of that shit. They're only going to read what's in the paper or in the news or whatever. So you need to take critical care to make sure that exact message that's going into that media is going to be exactly what you want people to absorb, because that's your sliver of a window into society. So you need to use that sliver to just get in there and deliver a crystal clear, unscrew-upable message. That's not the right word for that, but you need to make your message, like when we do a media release, it is so clear, even if you cut it into little pieces, everything is on point, right? But that's probably a topic for another discussion. But yeah, it's unfortunate what's happening with this Bill 156, but is it really though? Because I think we could almost, as a movement, this is kind of going to force an evolution.
Mm. I think if like things like the undercover footage and however else we can get a glimpse of what goes on, in these areas that they're trying to stop us from seeing, I think instead of releasing them in public videos and stuff like that, or bring it to authorities and stuff like that, if we just used it within the movement to show activists, you know, the conditions, such as like if you go to a vigil, like you were saying, to use it to show activists what's going on, and then use that to get them to do more effective activism. I think that would be useful, and that would, like, Bill 156 wouldn't even affect that.
That's actually a really good idea. I never thought of that.
We could use it, like, if we were to go into barns, or if we were to try to get hired at a place to see, you know, get behind enemy lines or whatever. I think, that would be more useful if it was kept, you know, out of the public eye and within the activist community, you know, to as part of campaigns and things like that, to try to,
Like a motivation.
right, yeah, exactly.
That's
and to keep an eye on the current practices and things like that, and you know, that sort of thing. I think that would be more useful than the way it's being used right now.
yeah. No, that's a good idea. Never thought of that. What have you been thinking about? What do you think of this? Anything to add? I know you're not up on your politics, but I mean, you know.
I mean, again, exposing what's happening isn't really, like, for the public isn't really potentially going anywhere, just because, I don't know, when you tell someone that someone owns slaves, their reaction shouldn't be, but how bad is it? Their reaction should be, that should not be happening. So, you know,
Right.
should be the same all around the board.
Yeah. And that's very speciesist, right? Because, I mean, no one would, their first question, like, if you were trying to stop black slavery or anything like that, you know, 200 years ago, you wouldn't say, well, let's talk about how bad they're treated, right? That it'd be like, no.
Go get footage, see how they're treated.
Can
if
we
they're
get
treated
them-
better, then
Yeah.
Can we get them
Imagine
nicer?
a white guy trying to go undercover, get undercover film of what it's like to be a slave.
Can we get them some nicer
gosh.
shoes so their feet are more comfortable?
I
I think
know.
their comfort should be
Right.
more of an issue, right? We wouldn't talk like that. We would be like, these people should not be kept as property,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
that is the same with animals. And that, I mean, that's the question everybody needs to ask themselves when they're doing your advocacy is like, if I was advocating for a human, would my advocacy look the same way it does now?
and if there were a bill being passed back then saying like, oh, like, no one is able to go onto these places, get footage, like, that's not going to be able to happen anymore, it would be like, okay, that's fine. It's still happening, like, that's still slavery, like, it
Right.
doesn't even matter
Exactly.
how good or bad or otherwise it is.
We'd see the problems pretty crystal clear right away,
Yeah.
right?
Right, and that's the thing, is if your advocacy for humans is different than your advocacy for animals, then that's a problem. And that's human supremacy showing there. You're placing human animals over top of other animals, and that's essentially the problem with very much of what we see in the animal advocacy movement today. Is a lot of the animal advocacy is really steeped in human supremacy.
And human privilege is a great tool that we can use to leverage
Oh, yeah.
for non-human interests, or we can use it to be contrary to their interests, right? By,
Yeah.
you know, on one hand, you can use your human privilege to deny them their you know, by only doing certain things without considering their best interests. Usually a lot of activism I see is usually in the interests of the individuals doing the activism, just to feel like they're doing something, right? And that's using your human privilege to decide how far you want to go in demanding justice for them, right? But on the other hand, you can wield that human privilege. It's going to cost you some social esteem, right? But I mean, we have a huge amount of privilege. For instance, our campaign in Niagara-on-the-Lake, they really would want us to just up and go and disappear from that corner, right? But we have the human privilege of being there constantly protesting. I mean, they tried to take our signs away. You know, they tried to take our signs away because they knew that was hugely effective, keeping people from getting on those rides.
Yeah.
You know, they tried to shut us down, but we have the human privilege of having rights as persons to stand there and do our advocacy.
Right.
And that is a huge thing that we can leverage. And they can't stop us from talking. They can't stop us from delivering our message.
No.
Right? So I don't know if we need to go to great lengths of breaking all the laws. I mean, doing so is a symbolic gesture, but I think in the end, it ultimately also harms animals because it takes people out of the ability to keep advocating and using and leveraging their human privilege, right? Because once you start getting bogged down in court and it's very costly, and they impose restrictions on what you can't do, right? And people you can't associate with. So I honestly think that we should be very careful. I'm not saying breaking the law is not a bad thing, or I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying we should be very careful in what we do in those aspects, and consider them the impact that it's going to have of taking people out of the ability of using their human privilege to advocate for non-human people.
That's a good point.
Yeah. There's so much more we can do if we just shift our messaging and our campaigning to be anti-speciesist.
Because really, the point of advocacy is agitation, right? And how much more agitating can you be if your opponent can't shut you up? If what you're doing is just annoying but also unstoppable, that's where your power is, right? Because when you're breaking the law, eventually they will stop you, because eventually you'll have broken enough times that you will finally, the court will impose a punishment upon you for what you've been doing. Whereas if you just ride right up to that ledge of legal and stay right there, there's nothing they can do because you've never gone over that edge, right? So they can't even begin to take any kind of actions against you because you're just hovering right at that line, right? And that's, if we were all just hovering right at that line most of the time, just agitating the fuck out of shit.
Even when they find something that they think they can get you on, and you win, that adds to your momentum and keeps things going.
Absolutely. And the key, I think, is also maintaining that agitation. I mean, the biggest thing that we do in Niagara Lake is we don't say when we're leaving.
Because we're not.
If you're going to war, you don't tell your enemies when you're leaving, right? You stick in there. You find an edge and you hang there, and you say we're not going away until our demands are met.
Right.
That's real social justice activism.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when you look at these other social justice movements, you don't have, all these separate entities all requesting, different levels of justice. Or, not even talking about justice, talking about conditions of injustice, right? You have everyone has a unified, direct message. And if we had that in this movement, we'd be so much more powerful than we are now. For sure.
Yeah. It's so all over the place, and it seems to be largely derived of do what you want, right? But without consideration of what is in the best interest of non-human people.
And
right?
What is the end goal?
Right.
Because if you're going to conduct an action, that action you should not conduct an action unless it leads to the next step or it's part of a bigger plan. Right? There's just getting together and just doing a protest just because you're going to do a protest, that's kind of nonsensical, because what is your goal that you hope to achieve from this action, and how does that action lead to the next action, which leads to the next goal, which directs you towards your end result, right? Before you start a campaign, you need to have an end result or multiple end results. And then you need to construct a plan of attack in order to work yourself towards those end goals, right? And along the way, you can't be afraid to completely drop what you're doing and just divert yourself another direction.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Alright, final thoughts?
Yeah, what's your final thoughts, Megan?
I think if you're going up against a bill that is likely to pass either way, your time would be more productively used to fight for non-human persons in a different way. That's basically my final thought.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't argue with that. That's pretty
Yeah.
straightforward.
When they zig, you zag.
Right. And I would just, like, if I was going to have a final thought about this, what would I want to say? I would say, yeah, like, the best tool we've had, at least in everything that we've done, is when people try to stop you from doing what you're currently doing. Don't care. Just do something else, right? And I mean, we even do other stuff after what we're doing loses its initial impact. Like, we're always keeping our opposition on their toes, because as soon as they get used to what we're doing, we just switch and do something else, and immediately then we're back in charge, right? And if you always do this, if you're always directing them, then they don't have the opportunity to try to direct you, because they're always reacting to you. And that's how you want everything you do to be, is you want everyone reacting to you. You don't react to what they do, right? And Bill 156 is something that they are trying to do to us. And the way I see it, when they try to do stuff to us, we do not react to them. They react to us, because we are running the show, right? So as soon as you start reacting to your opposition, you are no longer in control. If you're going to be in control, that means not reacting to others. And when they try to force you to react, you don't do that.
Yeah, because you're basically giving them exactly what the conservatives want.
Exactly. And in any situation, in any campaign, even if it's not even this, you do not react to your opposition. You force them to react to you. And you can do that in a host of different ways. The most powerful way is keeping them on their toes. And how do you keep someone on their toes? You keep switching what you're doing. You keep moving the goalposts. You keep pushing forward. And that's what I would say. Just don't get stuck on certain things. You gotta be fluid and just go.
Solid.
Alright, so my final thoughts on this, I think really it's our time is definitely better spent on campaigning, picking strategic targets to campaign against rather than opposing a bill like 156, and staying flexible so that when bills like 156 are passed, it'll have little to no effect on a campaign, because the campaign's constantly shifting and evolving and going in different directions and hitting the target from all angles. So I don't think they're really taking much away from activism, especially effective activism. So even if they are able to stifle one tactic, we don't really have a way of measuring if that tactic is actually effective or not anyway. And stats, if we look at stats or history, things like that, it shows that it's not very effective anyway. So I think we need to learn more about, like, the animal rights movement should do a little more research on how to campaign and how to effectively follow through with objectives and goals and stick to a campaign to reach the goal, rather than to do scattered random actions all over the place and at different targets, stuff like that. So I think we need to focus all of our resources and time and energy into strategic targets until we get our goal, and then we move on to the next target and the next goal.
Can't fucking argue with that.
Solid, absolutely. And that's kind of where our whole campaigning is designed around, right? It's like you just, like it's like a Trojan horse, right? Like what you're targeting isn't necessarily the goal. The goal is to defeat speciesism in society. So you just use that whatever you're targeting as like a Trojan horse to get the anti-speciesist message into society, right? And you stick with that until you achieve that particular goal. Then you move on to another place, but the message doesn't change. You just pick another place, right? And the whole time you're just pushing anti-speciesism out into society, right? And eventually it's going to be on the table of the social conscious of the whole community, right? If not the country. And that's kind of like where we're at. The movement's really young, but solid.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us today on this special episode of The Word. And join us next week for some more lively conversations about random topics out of Rando Hat. All right, so until next time,
Well, everybody's
bye everybody.
about the
Peace.
bird. The bird's a winner. Well, a bird